right, lots to get at, so let's get at it right away. Andrew, Chantal, and Bruce all here this week. Topic one, Quebec. Chantal, I want you to start us off. And first of all, welcome back. Missed you the last couple of weeks. But give us the primer, because most of English Canada has sort of been disconnected from the Quebec story for some time now. As we launch into this campaign, give us the primer on the stage. What is it?
The PQ was out of power for almost a decade. It's the first time in 15 years, 1998, that the polls lead you to believe that there is a good chance that there will be a majority PQ government. It's going to be 20 years since the last referendum. And although Madame Marois is very non-committal about a referendum, nobody seriously believes that if the PQ wins a majority, it will not, for a third time, try to get the conditions to have a referendum that it could win every PQ cycle, if you want to call it that, and this is the third. The previous two had referendums, and so there would be a return of some sort to referendum politics.
Let's see how she answers that referendum question. This is what she's been saying on the early part of the campaign trail. Here it is.
We said that is possible, but that is also possible to don't have a referendum. We will not do any strategy on the public place.
It's a certainty. Madame Marois is asking for a majority government. Why? To have a referendum.
All right, that's Philippe Couillard, the Liberal leader. You know, she knows how to answer those questions, but I don't know whether she can get away with it for 30 days, not being that specific. Andrew?
Oh, well, that's what she'll do, though. I mean, this plays out all the time, is you play as coy as you can. The opposition tries to make it as concrete as they can that the threat is coming. I'm not sure, you know, who exactly they think they're going to sway on either side, but there's always some section of the voters that wakes up at the last second and say, oh, my goodness, they might hold a referendum, and they can be herded back into the Liberal camp or indeed the CAQ camp. It's remarkable that we accept this as rote, that you hold a referendum not to find out what the public thinks, but simply when you think you can win it. That is not an accepted practice in other countries on this kind of question, but we've allowed it to become the question here. The only thing I would say is, while it's more than probable they will hold a referendum of some kind, it will be unlike any referendum we have previously seen in this country. We are in the post-Clarity Act era, and that is going to shape the strategies and actions of all the players, whether they are in sympathy with it or not. It's going to be a material factor in how this plays out.
I want to get to what you mean exactly by that. But first of all, Bruce, can she get away for 30 days in not answering in specific ways that question?
She can choose to do that, but I think the risk for her is that her opponents will keep on driving at that issue. And Jean Charest was successful doing that in elections past, to the point where it becomes really a question of whether or not she can escape the constant scrutiny, the constant demand for some clarity on that. So I don't think she can. But Chantal and I were talking about this earlier. I think the understanding on the part of the electorate is that, well, most Quebec voters are cool to the idea of sovereignty. Most of the leaders who are running in this campaign are for it. The only one who's really not is Philippe Couillard. And that's an oddity of this election campaign. And it's an oddity in part because you do have a fair number of people who look as though they're prepared to vote for the PQ. Although, as the pollster here, it's probably incumbent upon me to do the caveat that polls have been really sketchy lately at predicting outcomes. Sketchy is the kindest word that I can use. And I think people should be very careful, especially with the volatility of some of these polls, to assume anything about how this election
will go. And is it not true that in the past, for the last 40 years, that the Federalist vote in Quebec has been underestimated?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's, all of this is kind of putting the horse before the campaign cart. We are on day 2 of a Quebec election campaign, and there is another leader who doesn't want a referendum, the Coalition Avenir Québec, so that's 2 out of the 3 main leaders.
This is the third party, right?
I didn't say a referendum, I said warm to the idea of sovereignty.
We could debate all night on where that party stands, so let's not do that. But if there was a will for Quebecers to have this question put to them, Madame Marois would not be hiding behind every microphone and launching a campaign where she managed not to say the word sovereignty, the word referendum, or the word majority. Because there is no need for Madame Marois to slip up and suddenly say, oh, of course we'll have a referendum. For every Quebecer to know that if the PQ thinks that it can win, it will have one, and that it will try to create conditions that will allow it to win. But at this point, the popular will, even amongst people who are sympathetic to the idea of sovereignty, does not go in the direction of a referendum. It's about 60-40, the answer in the polls to a referendum question.
Just to add to Bruce's point, it's not just the polls that are sketchy, it's that campaigns matter more than they ever did in the past. There's much more volatility in the actual underlying vote, never mind how it's measured. So while they certainly are coming in a stronger position than the other parties, a lot can happen in the next month.
I want to show you another answer that she gave, Pauline Marois, and that was today, to the question of whether or not there would be an English language debate. Watch this.
Are you open to it?
I said, I made some comments about this question some years ago. I am able to speak in English, and I think I improved my English, but I don't think I will be very comfortable in a debate for explaining my specific point of view, and I don't think that will serve the the Quebecers, the Anglo-Quebecers.
I want you to go behind the answer on that. I mean, we do live in a country of two official languages.
Okay, so
I'm not
let's
asking
agree.
you to speak Japanese here.
Let's agree that Kathleen Wynne would not do very well either in an all-French language debate in Ontario, or that they are few and far between in most provinces, those French language election debates at the provincial level. So on that basis, I can't think of a time when there has been an English language debate in a Quebec election. Maybe it's my memory that's sketchy, but Lucien Bouchard, Jacques Parizeau, Jean Charest all spoke fairly good English, but they didn't have debates in English.
What's the upside for her? I mean, how many English-speaking votes is she hoping to pick up? All she can do is make a mistake that might trip her up in the rest of the election. They've gone out of their way to advertise, even by PQ standards, how little regard they have for the English-speaking population in Quebec. This is just all of a piece. Accepting Chantal's points, it's also of a piece with everything we've heard from her party.
Does anyone make it an issue? Bruce?
I don't think so. I suspect the issue that will be more prominent is, well, maybe two issues. One is whether she's arranging her schedule and the events that she participates in, the way in which she interacts with the media in a way that really limits voters' exposure to her thoughts and who she is. And there was certainly some indication on day one of the election campaign, corrected a bit today, that she might be going in that direction. And the other thing, I guess, is if there's a pattern of trying to use identity politics as a surrogate, as a stalking horse for sovereignty politics, because she doesn't want to talk about a referendum and she doesn't really want to talk about sovereignty. But if we see a bunch of statements and decisions and the ways in which they are articulated sound like identity politics writ large, then I think it's somewhat disconcerting.
Just quickly on Rosemary Barton's piece earlier in the hour, this sense that the Prime Minister reached out to Tom Mulcair for, I don't know whether advice is the right word, but at least what Mulcair is thinking on the situation as it sits right now before an election, which many people fear could lead to a PQ majority and a potential referendum. Andrew?
You'd expect no less, let's put it that way. This is an issue that transcends or should transcend party differences, even though they do have real legitimate differences on exactly how to pursue it. You want to be on the same page as much as you possibly can. I agree with you that he also could probably use some of Mulcair's advice on some of these questions. But on some of them, I hope he doesn't take Mulcair's advice, for example, on the question of what's a clear majority.
The 50.1.
Yeah.
Or +1.
I'm guessing that the job of Thomas Mulcair and Stephen Harper is not to decide what is an acceptable majority, but to avoid giving Madame Marois more rope than she already has to find her so-called winning conditions for a referendum. That being said, I'm convinced both of them have the unity of the country at heart, but there is some political interest in them trying to fend off a challenge from Justin Trudeau, whose party is associated with referendums and whose name is associated with unity, and who could probably get a good run out of a possible Quebec referendum, at least with voters outside that province.
And who, to my knowledge, Harper has not reached out to.
Well,
You're saying he hasn't?
My understanding is that there's not been the same effort that was made with Mulcair to consult on this or on Ukraine.
With Justin Trudeau. Bruce, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I agree with Andrew on one part, that we should expect no less, but we've been actually trained to expect less lately. And so, in a way, good on the Prime Minister that he's doing this. I think if it's more difficult for him because he happens to be a more partisan individual, all the better that he's choosing to do it on an issue like this and choosing not, at least one assumes, choosing not to make a big deal of it. I think it must be a hard conversation for them to have a cordial, genial exchange about something as important as this with all of the partisanship that occupies their lives the rest of the day. But I always feel that this Prime Minister, is at his best when he's playing the role of statesman, whether it's talking about Ukraine or dealing with an issue like this in the way that he apparently has with Mr. Mulcahy. He should do more of that.
We should say it's been a good week for bipartisanship on the Ukraine question. There were some very measured questions in question period about this. You saw Chrystia Freeland, who's over there in Kiev, saying, I'm not going to break ranks with the Prime Minister on this. There are occasions when you do have to show a united front, and for once our parties are finding that.
And how close, arm in arm, are they on marijuana laws now? I mean, we've watched for the past year, and everybody's seen it, the Conservatives bashing Justin Trudeau over his issue of legalizing marijuana. The Conservatives aren't talking about that, but they are talking about reducing this to same as a parking ticket.
Decriminalizing marijuana. Right?
What do we make of that? Why are they doing that?
I suspect that if they paid any attention to the debate that led the Liberals to take this position, they might have noted, as I did on that convention floor when it was voted, that it was not the young, excited activists who were promoting this, but the parents in the room. And it could well be that they have polling that shows that while most Canadians are probably not keen to see dope on offer at the corner store, the notion of decriminalizing, which the police chiefs have called for, would go a long way to blunt the Trudeau promise and reposition the Conservatives in a place where the public probably is.
Well, as we know, some Conservatives, strategists, have said that Trudeau actually was making gains on that even when their party was trashing him. Bruce, you?
I think it's clear evidence of a recalculation of the political math of this on the part of the Conservatives. I think they thought when Mr. Trudeau took his position that they were going to have him on the ropes on this, that this was tailor-made for them. And I think they've probably learned that this attack, like several of the others that they've initiated, has really not borne any success. I think they're also looking at other jurisdictions and polling in places like the United States, where the pace of change, at least towards decriminalization, to some degree towards legalization, is actually fairly brisk. The interesting thing, so I think it's a smart recalculation on their part. It de-risks the situation that they were in. The question in my mind is, will Justin Trudeau see this as an opportunity to recalibrate his position, which probably has more risk than is in his interest?
In going the full distance.
Yes. What he could do, in effect, is say, okay, I'll go along with this idea, and I'll campaign on the notion that we should watch and learn from jurisdictions like those in the American Northwest that have gone for legalization.
It shows you why issues that oftentimes people think are going to be big issues in elections don't turn out to be, because by the time the election rolls around, the parties have found a way to minimize the differences. I think it's very shrewd on the Conservatives' part, this latest move. I don't think it's going to mean that they're going to let up on the attacks on Justin, but I think if that was all they were doing, they risked making themselves look retrograde and they didn't have a position. Whereas by doing this, by moving towards him, they can say, well, we're the ones who are closer to where the public is. He's the extreme, he's the radical. Now, whether they'll make that fly or not, I don't know, but it's a much smarter play, I think, than just simply hammering him.
Which is why he might well want to look at the situation again and say, does this give me a door to walk through that I might have been looking for?
Yeah. So instead of calling him two-faced, take the opportunity himself, perhaps.
Well, the
back
thing
off.
with calling parties two-faced on issues like that is that people stick with the substance at the end of the day. These are concrete issues. They may not be central, but the name-calling only gets you so far, and once you've finished calling the other person's name, if the position sounds reasonable, that position is going to sell.
All right. Good chat. Good to talk to everyone.